The war had burned across Velthar Prime for 3 long years, and Commander Elias Kane had seen enough death to last 10 lifetimes. Yet nothing prepared him for what he would find in the ruins of the capital city. That day the UES Defiant was a medical frigate, not a warship, and her crew had no business being this close to the front lines. But orders were orders, and humanity wanted to prove itself useful to the Galactic Concord by offering humanitarian aid. During the Velthari Civil War, Kane led a small team through the smoking streets, their boots crunching on broken glass and fallen stone. The screams of the wounded filled the air, mixing with the distant thunder of plasma cannons. And everywhere he looked there was fire and chaos and pain. "Commander, we need to pull back," Sergeant Torres shouted over the noise, her voice tight with fear. "The Eastern forces are pushing through. We have maybe 20 minutes before this whole sector falls." Kane heard her, but something made him stop. It was a sound so small that it should have been lost in the madness of battle, a tiny whimper. Like a wounded animal crying in the dark, he held up his fist to signal a halt and listened to Gainther. It was coming from beneath a collapsed building to his left, buried under tons of rubble and burning debris. "Sir, we don't have time," Torres insisted, grabbing his arm. "We need to get back to the shuttle now." But Kane was already moving toward the sound, pulling away from her grip and climbing over the rubble. He could hear Torres cursing behind him, calling him crazy, telling him they would all die if he didn't turn back, but he kept going. Smoke burned his lungs, and the heat scorched his skin through his uniform. Yet he dug through the debris with his bare hands, throwing aside chunks of stone and twisted metal until his fingers bled. And then he saw Hirsch was just a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old by human standards, with iridescent scales that shimmered blue and gold even through the layer of dust and blood that covered her small body. Her golden eyes stared up at him with terror and confusion, and she clutched something in her tiny clawed hands, a pendant made of some kind of crystal that glowed faintly in the darkness. Kane had never seen a Velthari up close before. Humanity was still new to the galactic stage, and most aliens kept their distance from the young species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. But in that moment, species didn't matter. All he saw was a dying child who needed help. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, kneeling beside her and gently checking her injuries. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" She didn't understand his words. The Velthari language was nothing like any human tongue, but something in his voice must have reached her, because she stopped struggling and let him lift her into his arms. Weighed almost nothing, and her blood soaked into his uniform as he held her against his chest. One of her legs was badly broken, and she had deep wounds across her back and shoulder, probably from falling debris. Without immediate medical attention, she would die within the hour. "Commander, what are you doing?" Torres demanded when Kane emerged from the rubble with the alien child. Her eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed with frustration. "We can't take her. She's not on the evacuation list. She's not our responsibility." "She is now," Kane replied, already moving toward the extraction point. "Radio the shuttle and tell them to prep the medical bay for emergency surgery on a juvenile Velthari female, sir. The Velthari government hasn't authorized us to evacuate their citizens," Torres argued, falling into step beside him. "If we take her, it could cause a diplomatic incident. Earth Command will have our heads." Kane stopped and looked at her, his gray eyes hard as steel. "Sergeant, that child will die in the next 30 minutes if we don't help her. I don't care about diplomacy. I don't care about authorization. And I don't care what Earth Command thinks now. Call the damn shuttle." Torres stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head and activated her comm unit. "Shuttle 7, this is Torres. We're coming in hot with a medical emergency. One juvenile Velthari female with critical injuries. Have the surgical team standing by." The run to the extraction point took 15 minutes. That felt like 15 hours. Kane carried the child through streets filled with screaming refugees and dying soldiers. Twice he had to dive for cover when plasma fire streaked overhead, shielding her body with his own as explosions tore through the buildings around them. His blood dripped onto her wounds as shrapnel cut his arms and back, mixing with her blood in a way neither of them would ever forget. Velthari possessed something unique among the galaxy's species, an olfactory memory that lasted for centuries. They could remember every scent they ever encountered, and those scents carried emotional weight far deeper than any visual or auditory memory. To a Velthari, scent was identity, was truth, was the very essence of a person's soul, and as Kane's blood mingled with hers, as she breathed in the smell of his sweat and fear and desperate courage, his scent became permanently imprinted in her mind, a memory she would carry for the rest of her very long life. They reached the shuttle just as the Eastern forces broke through the defensive line. Kane handed the child to the medical team and collapsed against the bulkhead, exhausted and bleeding from a dozen wounds. He watched through blurred vision as the doctors worked frantically to save her life, their hands moving with practiced precision as the shuttle lifted off and escaped the burning city. Hours later, when the child was stable and sleeping in the medical bay, Kane visited her one last time. She looked so small on the examination table, surrounded by tubes and monitors and machines that kept her alive. Her golden eyes fluttered open as he approached, and she made a small sound, not of fear, but of recognition. "You're going to be okay," he told her, even though she couldn't understand. "Your people will take care of you from here." He took the pendant that the doctors had removed from her grip and placed it gently back into her tiny claws. She wrapped her fingers around it and held on tight, her eyes never leaving his face, and she spoke just one word in her own language, a word that Kane would never learn the meaning of, though he would remember the sound for the rest of his life. Defiant transferred her to a Velthari refugee vessel the next day, and Kane never saw her again. The war ended 6 months later, and humanity's brief attempt at galactic humanitarianism was quickly forgotten by the Concord powers, who had real influence in the galaxy. Earth Command reprimanded Kane for the unauthorized evacuation, though they stopped short of formal discipline. He served another 10 years before leaving the military, tired of politics and paperwork and being treated as second class by species who looked down on humanity. He bought a cargo ship, named it the Wandering Merchant, and spent the next decade hauling freight across the galaxy's less fashionable trade routes. The child he saved became a distant memory, fading into the blur of countless other missions, countless other refugees, countless other faces that he had helped and then forgotten or never wondered what happened to her. Never imagined that she had spent every single day of the last 20 years searching for him. 20 years had passed since the war on Velthar Prime, and Elias Kane was no longer a young commander with fire in his heart. He was a 53-year-old cargo hauler with gray in his beard and aches in his bones, living one delivery at a time in a galaxy that barely noticed he existed. The Wandering Merchant was an old ship, held together by hope and cheap repairs, but she had been good to him over the years. She didn't judge him, didn't demand anything from him except regular maintenance and the occasional kind word. When her engines sputtered, Kane sat alone in the cockpit, watching the stars streak past the viewport as the ship cruised through hyperspace. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Waste was a luxury he couldn't afford. The calm panel beeped with an incoming message, and he reached over to accept the transmission. "Captain Kane, this is Nexus Station Commerce Authority," a bored voice announced. "Your cargo manifest has been approved for delivery to Docking Bay 47. Please proceed to the station upon arrival and check in with customs." "Understood, Nexus Station," Kane replied, then cut the connection and leaned back in his seat with a tired sigh. Nexus Station was the largest space station in the known galaxy, a massive structure that served as the neutral meeting ground for all the major powers of the galactic Concord. Politicians, diplomats, merchants, and criminals all mixed together in its endless corridors, making deals and breaking promises and pretending that any of it actually mattered. Kane had been there a few times before, always as a delivery man bringing goods to the wealthy and powerful. He was invisible in places like that, just another human hauler with a small ship and smaller ambitions, easily overlooked by the important people who ran the galaxy. But this trip was different from his usual runs. The cargo he carried was valuable rare earth products like coffee, chocolate, and authentic human art that fetched high prices among alien collectors. A wealthy Melkari merchant had hired him for this job, paying 3 times his usual rate because the delivery had to arrive in time. For the Galactic Summit was a massive event that happened once every decade, bringing together representatives from all the major species to discuss trade, territory, and the future of the Concord. This year's summit was even more significant than usual, because it would mark the official coronation of the new Velthari Empress. Kane had heard stories about her. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about her. Sovereign Queen Viralthana the Reclaimer, they called her. The warrior princess who had risen from the ashes of the Civil War to unite her fractured people and build them into one of the galaxy's dominant powers. She was brilliant, they said, and ruthless, and filled with a cold fury toward the Cathari slavers who had profited from her people's suffering during the war. Under her rule, the Velthari had crushed the Cathari slave trade and liberated millions of captives from dozens of species. Some said she was a hero. Others said she was a tyrant hiding behind noble causes. Kane didn't really care either way. Politics had stopped interesting him a long time ago, and alien royalty meant nothing to a man who just wanted to deliver his cargo and collect his payment. Wandering merchant dropped out of hyperspace 3 hours later. A Nexus station filled the viewport with its impossible size. Kane guided his ship toward the designated docking bay, passing hundreds of other vessels, warships and freighters and luxury yachts and diplomatic cruisers. From every corner of the Galaxia had never seen so many ships gathered in one place. The summit had drawn the wealthy and powerful from every major species, and the station was packed to capacity with ambassadors and nobles and their countless servants. And Guardskane docked his ship without incident and began the tedious process of unloading his cargo. The Melkari merchant sent automated drones to collect the crates, and Kane supervised the transfer from the loading bay of his ship, checking manifests and scanning containers to make sure nothing was damaged. The work took several hours, and by the time he was finished, Kane was tired and hungry and in desperate need of a shower. But his payment had already transferred to his account, more credits than he usually earned in 6 months, so he decided to treat himself to a decent meal before leaving the station. Found a small restaurant on one of the lower levels, far from the glamour and glitter of the summit halls above. This part of the station was home to workers and merchants and all the invisible people who kept the galaxy running while the powerful made speeches and signed trades. The food was simple but good, and Kane ate alone at a corner table, watching the crowd and thinking about nothing in particular. The news feeds on the wall showed images of the summit preparations, alien dignitaries arriving in elaborate processions, diplomats shaking hands and making empty promises, and everywhere the banner of the Velthari sovereignty flying alongside the flags of 100 other nations. Coronation ceremony would take place tomorrow, and the entire station was buzzing with excitement. Queen Viralthana would address the full Concord assembly for the first time since claiming her throne, and everyone was eager to hear what she would say. Kane paid his bill and wandered back toward the docking bay, passing through crowded carters filled with aliens of every shape and size. He was invisible among them, just another human face in a galaxy full of beings who considered his species barely worth noticing. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for nearly 40 years now, but they were still treated as newcomers, as children who hadn't yet earned their place at the adult table. Human technology was primitive, human lifespans were embarrassingly short, and human influence in galactic politics was essentially zero. Some humans resented this treatment. Others accepted it as the natural order of things. Kane had given up caring a long time ago. He just wanted to live his quiet life and be left alone. He reached his ship and climbed the boarding ramp, already planning his next destination. There was a mining colony in the outer systems that needed supplies, and the pay was decent even if the trip was long. He had no idea that far above him, in the crystal halls of the summit complex, a queen had just frozen in mid. Steffi had no idea that the station's ventilation system had carried a few molecules of his scent, the scent of coffee and engine grease and something else, something uniquely human, all the way up to the royal corridor. He had no idea that Queen Viralthana the Reclaimer, the most powerful Velthari in the galaxy, was at that very moment dismissing her guards and advisors and beginning a search that would turn the entire station upside down. And he certainly had no idea that she had spent 20 years building an empire, in part just to find him. Scent she had carried in her memory since childhood, the scent of the strange alien who had bled for her and carried her through fire and given her back her pendant with such gentle hands that scent was here. On this station, somewhere in the levels below, had found him at last, and nothing in the galaxy would stop her from reaching him. Queen Viralthana had stopped breathing, her royal guard tensed around her, their hands moving to their weapons as they scanned for threats. Her advisors exchanged confused glances, unsure why their empress had suddenly frozen like a statue in the middle of the corridor. "Your Majesty," her chief advisor ventured carefully, taking a small step toward her. "Is something wrong?" Viralthana did not answer. She could not answer. Her entire world had narrowed to a single point of focus, a scent so faint that no other species could have detected it. Carried on the recycled air of the station's ventilation system, it was him. After 20 years of searching, 20 years of sending agents to every corner of the galaxy, 20 years of never forgetting a single molecule of that impossible smell, it was finally, truly, undeniably him. Her heart saw 3 of them pounded against her chest. As memories flooded through her mind, she was a child again, trapped under burning rubble with her legs shattered and her blood pooling beneath her. She was dying, alone and forgotten, abandoned by her own people in the chaos of war. And then he had come, the strange alien with the soft skin and the kind eyes, digging through the debris with his bare hands until they bled. The warmth of his arms as he lifted her, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek as he ran through streets filled with fire and death. His blood had dripped onto her wounds as he shielded her from explosions. And in that moment his scent had burned itself into her memory forever. She would have known that smell anywhere in the universe, across any distance, after any amount of time, and now it was here, on this station. Somewhere in the levels below. "Clear this corridor," Viralthana commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty," her guard captain asked, confused. "I said clear it," she snapped, and her voice echoed off the crystal walls with sudden force. "Everyone out now." The guards and advisors scrambled to obey, shocked by the intensity in her voice. Within moments the corridor was empty except for the Queen herself, standing alone with her eyes closed and her scales shimmering with barely contained emotion. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, had imagined it in 1,000 different ways. Sometimes she pictured a formal ceremony where she would honor him before the entire galaxy. Other times she imagined a quiet meeting, just the 2 of them, where she could finally say the words she had carried in her heart since childhood. But now that the moment was actually here, she felt something she had not felt since the war. Fear. What if he didn't remember her? What if he had saved hundreds of children during the war, and she was just one of many faces that he had long forgotten? What if he was already dead, and the scent she detected was just a trace left behind by some possession he had owned? No, she shook her head violently, banishing the doubts from her mind. She could not think like that. She had come too far and searched too long to give up now. She lifted her head and began to walk, following the trace of his scent through the corridors of the station. Her guards hurried after her, calling out questions and protests that she ignored completely. Her advisors sent frantic messages to her personal comm unit, warning her that the coronation preparations needed her attention, that the Concord delegates were waiting for her arrival, that she could not simply abandon her duties on a whim. She ignored them all. The scent led her down through the station, away from the glittering halls of the summit complex and into the working levels below. She passed through markets and warehouses and residential blocks, drawing stares and gasps from the common people who had never imagined seeing their empress. In these forgotten corners of the station, rumors began to spread almost immediately. By the time she reached the cargo levels, half the station was buzzing with speculation about what could possibly have caused the Velthari Queen to abandon her royal procession and descend into the lower decks like a woman possessed. Some said she had received news of an assassination attempt and was fleeing for her life. Others whispered that she had lost her mind, driven mad by the pressures of ruling an empire. A few suggested darker possibilities, that she was hunting someone, that the legendary fury of the Reclaimer had been awakened by some unknown offense. None of them came close to the truth. Viralthana moved through the cargo levels with single-minded focus, ignoring everything except the scent that grew stronger with every step. She passed loading drones and cargo crates and tired workers who dropped their tools and stared in disbelief as the most powerful woman in the galaxy swept past them without A glance, and then she found him. He was standing in the cargo bay of a small, battered freighter, checking something on a datapad with the casual posture of a man who had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He had gray in his beard now, and his face was lined with age and hard living. But his eyes were the same kind and gray and steady. The eyes that had looked at a dying alien child and seen something worth saving. Viral Thana stopped at the bottom of his loading ramp, and for a moment she could not speak. Her voice, the voice that commanded armies and silenced senates, had abandoned her completely. Kane looked up from his datapad and saw her standing there, and his expression shifted from confusion to shock to something like fear. He did not recognize her. How could he? When the last time he had seen her, she was a broken child barely clinging to life. But she remembered him. She remembered everything. I found you, she breathed, and her voice cracked with 20 years of longing. Tears streamed down her scaled cheeks, and she did not care who saw them. Let the galaxy witness her weakness. This moment was worth any price. Kane took a step back, overwhelmed by the sight of an alien empress standing in his cargo bay with tears on her face and guards behind her. I'm sorry, he said carefully, but I think you might have the wrong person. Kethaval Almori, she interrupted, speaking the words in her own language. My life giver. That is what I called you. When I was too young and too injured to know your name. She reached into her ceremonial robes and pulled out something that glinted in the harsh light of the cargo bay, a pendant made of crystal, mounted on a chain of precious metal. Kane stared at it, and his face went pale. You gave this back to me, Viral Thana continued, taking a slow step toward him. After you carried me through fire and blood, after you saved my life when my own people left me to die, you placed this pendant back in my hands and told me I would be okay. She took another step, and another, until she was standing close enough to touch him. I have searched for you for 20 years, she whispered. I built an empire in part because I wanted the resources to find you. I crushed the slavers who profited from my people's suffering, but even victory felt hollow because I could not share it with the one who gave me the chance to live. Kane's hands were shaking as he reached out and gently took the pendant, turning it over in his fingers. That was you? He managed. That little girl in the rubble, that was you. Viral Thana smiled through her tears, and for just a moment she was that child again, small and frightened, and desperately grateful to the strange alien who had shown her kindness. When the universe offered only cruelty, yes, she said simply. That was me, and I have never forgotten you, Elias Kane, not for a single day. The galaxy had never seen anything like this. Within hours of the Queen's disappearance from the summit corridor, news of her strange behavior had spread to every corner of Nexus Station. Reporters from 100 different species crowded around the cargo levels, desperate to capture images of the Velthari Empress standing in a grimy loading bay with a human freighter captain. The Concord delegates were in chaos. Diplomats sent frantic messages demanding explanations. Advisors argued about protocol and security, and the carefully planned coronation ceremony had ground to a complete halt while everyone waited to learn what had possessed Queen Viral Thana to abandon her duties for a random human nobody. But Viral Thana cared nothing for the chaos she had caused. All her attention was focused on the man standing before her, the man whose face she had dreamed about for 20 years, the man who had taught her that kindness could exist even in the darkest moments of war. Kane still held the pendant in his trembling hands, staring at it like he was seeing a ghost. I can't believe it, he murmured. I thought about you sometimes, wondered what happened to you, but I never imagined this. You never tried to find me, Viral Thana asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, only curiosity. Kane shook his head slowly. After the war, your government made it clear that humans weren't welcome in Velthari space, and honestly, I figured you would have better things to do than remember some random soldier who carried you to a shuttle. Random soldier, the Queen repeated, and something fierce blazed in her golden eyes. Is that what you think you are to me? She turned to face her guards and advisors, who stood at a respectful distance with expressions of shock and confusion. Bring me the Concord delegates, she commanded. All of them, every ambassador, every representative, every dignitary who came to witness my coronation. Bring them here to this cargo bay. Her chief advisor stepped forward with a look of alarm. Your Majesty, Surely you cannot mean to hold the coronation ceremony in a cargo bay. The protocols, the traditions. I am the sovereign queen of the Velthari, Viralthana interrupted coldly. I make the protocols. I create the traditions. And I will hold the ceremony wherever I choose. The advisor bowed hastily and hurried away to carry out her orders. And within the hour the cargo bay of the wandering merchant had been transformed into the strangest throne room the galaxy had ever seen. Delegates from dozens of species packed into the space, their elaborate robes and ceremonial armor looking absurdly out of place among the cargo crates and loading equipment. Holographic cameras broadcast the scene to billions of viewers across the galaxy. All of them wondering what could possibly be happening. Kane tried to slip away during the preparations, uncomfortable with the attention and desperate to return to his quiet, anonymous life. But Viralthana caught his arm with surprising strength and held him in place. Please stay, she said softly. I need the galaxy to understand why I did this, and for that, they need to see you. Kane wanted to protest, wanted to explain that he was nobody important and that he didn't deserve this kind of attention. But something in her eyes stopped him, something that reminded him of the scared child who had looked up at him from beneath the rubble. 20 years ago. Okay, he said finally. I'll stay. When the delegates had assembled and the cameras were rolling, Viralthana climbed onto a cargo crate and faced the crowd with all the royal dignity of a queen addressing her court. I have brought you here to witness something unprecedented, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cargo bay and out to the billions watching across the galaxy. 20 years ago, during the darkest days of the Civil War, I was a child trapped beneath a collapsed building, dying and alone. My own people had abandoned me in the chaos, and I had accepted that I would never see another sunrise. She paused and looked at Kane, who stood awkwardly near the back of the crowd, clearly wishing he could disappear. And then a human came, she continued. Not a soldier seeking glory, not a diplomat pursuing advantage, just a man who heard a child crying and refused to leave her. Behind, murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Many of them had never heard this story, had never imagined that their powerful empress owed her life to a member of the galaxy's most overlooked species. He carried me through 3 kilometers of active combat, Viralthana said. He shielded my body with his own when explosions tore through the streets. His blood mingled with mine as he ran, and in doing so he left his scent burned forever into my memory. She held up the pendant for everyone to see. When I was safe on his ship, barely conscious and clinging to life, he came to my side and placed this pendant back in my hands. He told me I would be okay, and then he disappeared from my life, never seeking recognition or reward for what he had done. The cargo bay had gone completely silent. Even the most cynical diplomats were listening with rapt attention, moved by the raw emotion in the Queen's voice. I have spent 20 years searching for this man, Viralthana declared. I built an empire in part because I wanted the resources to find him. I crushed the Cathari slavers not just for my people, but because they represented everything that the human soldier had fought against: cruelty, greed, the willingness to profit from suffering. She stepped down from the cargo crate and walked toward Kane, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. The Galactic Concord dismisses humanity, she said, stopping in front of him and looking into his gray eyes. You call them primitive, short-lived, insignificant. You mock their technology and ignore their voices and treat them as children who have not earned their place at the table. Her voice rose with sudden power. But I tell you now that this man, this ordinary human with his battered ship and his quiet life, showed more courage and compassion in a single hour than most of you have shown in your entire existence. She turned back to the crowd, and her eyes blazed with fierce conviction. Humans are small and fragile and brief, yet they carry something within them that even the eldest species have forgotten. They care without calculation. They sacrifice without expectation of reward. They see a dying child of another species, and they run toward her, not away. Viralthana reached out and took Kane's hand in hers, lifting it for the crowd to see. This is Elias Kane, the human who saved my life, and I declare before the entire Concord that he is KETH single quotes Val-AMORI-life-giver, hero, a soul worthy of honor. Any who insult him insult me, and any who harm him harm the Velthari sovereignty itself. The cargo bay erupted in whispers. and gasps. But Viral Thana was not finished. Let the galaxy remember this day, she said. Let them remember that an empire rose because a human soldier refused to leave a dying child behind. And let them remember that the Velthari never forget a debt or a kindness. She squeezed Kane's hand gently, and when she spoke again her voice was soft enough that only he could hear. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. The days that followed the Queen's announcement were unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. News of the human cargo hauler who had saved the Velthari Empress spread across every network and every world. Billions of beings watched the footage of Viral Thana standing in a cargo bay, holding the hand of an ordinary man and declaring him a hero worthy of eternal honor. Human communities across the galaxy erupted in celebration. For the first time in 40 years of galactic membership, humanity had been publicly recognized not for their technology or their military strength, but for something far more valuable. The Concord delegates returned to their worlds with much to think about. Many of them had dismissed humans for decades, treating them as primitive newcomers unworthy of serious attention. But now they had witnessed something that challenged every assumption they had ever made. If a single human could inspire such loyalty in the most powerful Velthari in history, then perhaps humanity was not as insignificant as they had believed. But Elias Kane wanted none of it. The attention terrified him. Reporters camped outside his ship, diplomats sent endless invitations to ceremonies and banquets, and strangers approached him on the station demanding autographs and handshakes. He felt like an animal in a zoo, stared at by creatures who saw him as a curiosity rather than a person. Viral Thana noticed his discomfort almost immediately. She had ordered her guards to give him space, but she could see the tension in his shoulders and the exhaustion in his eyes whenever another crowd gathered to catch a glimpse of the famous human hero. On the third day after her announcement, she invited him to a private meeting in her quarters away from the cameras and the crowds and the endless noise of galactic politics. Kane arrived looking tired and uncomfortable, clearly expecting another ceremony or speech. But instead he found the Queen alone, dressed in simple robes without any of the ceremonial armor she had worn in public. Please sit, she said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near a window that looked out on the endless stars. I imagine you could use some peace and quiet. Kane sank into the chair with a grateful sigh. You have no idea, he admitted. I'm not built for this kind of attention. I'm just a cargo hauler who did what anyone would have done. Viral Thana sat across from him and studied his face with those golden eyes that had haunted her memories for 2 decades. That is where you are wrong, she said gently. Most people would not have done what you did. Most people would have listened to your sergeant and returned to the shuttle. Most people would have decided that a dying alien child was not worth risking their lives. She leaned forward, her voice intense with conviction. You were different. You heard me crying and you could not walk away, and that difference saved my life and changed the course of galactic history. Ken was silent for a long moment, staring out at the stars. I never thought about it that way, he admitted finally. I just saw a kid who needed help. I didn't care what species she was, or what her government might think. She was dying and I could save her, so I did, and that, Viral Thana said softly, is exactly why humanity frightens the elder species. Ken looked at her in surprise. Frightens them? The Queen nodded slowly. We have lived among the stars for thousands of years, and in that time we have learned to calculate every action, to weigh every choice against potential benefits and costs. We have become careful and cautious and cold, because survival in a dangerous galaxy demands nothing less. She gestured toward the window and the countless stars beyond. But humans are different. You burn bright and fast, living such short lives that you cannot afford to calculate endlessly. You act on instinct and emotion, on love and anger and compassion, in ways that the elder species have forgotten how to do. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. When I was trapped under that rubble, I had given up hope. My own people had abandoned me, and I had accepted that the universe was cruel and cold and uncaring. But then you came, bleeding and determined and utterly unwilling to let me die, and in that moment you showed me that kindness could exist even in the darkest places. Kane didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that his actions that day had meant so much to anyone, let alone reshape the entire worldview of a future empress. I want to give you something, Viralthana said, rising from her chair. Not as repayment, nothing could ever repay what you gave me, but as a symbol of what your kindness has meant to me and to my people. She pressed a button on her wrist, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. It showed a document covered in elegant Velthari script, with official seals and signatures from what appeared to be the highest levels of government. This is a declaration of protected alliance, the Queen explained. From this day forward, humanity is officially recognized as a protected ally of the Velthari sovereignty. Any attack on human vessels will be considered an act of war against my empire. Human merchants will trade freely in all Velthari territories without tariffs or restrictions. Human refugees will find sanctuary in our worlds whenever they need it. Kane stared at the document in disbelief. You can't do that, he protested. The other species will never accept it, and humanity hasn't earned that kind of protection. You earned it, Viralthana replied firmly. 20 years ago, in a burning city on a world torn apart by war, you earned it. And I will not allow anyone to tell me otherwise. She reached into her robes and pulled out something small, the pendant that Kane had returned to her so long ago. Now mounted on a medallion of precious metal and inscribed with flowing Velthari text. Take this, she said, pressing it into his hands. The inscription says, the galaxy remembers strength. The Velthari remember sacrifice. I remember you, Elias Kane. Wherever you go in this galaxy, show this medallion and my people will know that you are under my personal protection. Kane looked down at the medallion, feeling the weight of it in his hands, a weight that represented far more than the precious metal it was made of. It represented a debt of gratitude that spanned 20 years and stretched across the stars. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Viralthana smiled, not the fierce smile of a warrior queen, but the gentle smile of the child he had once saved. You don't have to say anything, she replied. Just live your life, Elias Kane. Haul your cargo and travel your routes, and be the good man you have always been. And know that somewhere in this galaxy, there's an empress who will never forget what you did for her. 3 days later, Kane guided the wandering merchant away from Nexus Station and set course for the outer systems. The mining colony still needed its supplies, and he was eager to return to his quiet, anonymous life. But as he settled into the pilot's seat and watched the stars stretch into lines of light, he felt the medallion resting against his chest, warm and solid and real, a reminder that his life had touched others in ways he could never have imagined. Behind him, the galaxy was changing. Human ambassadors were being invited to meetings they had previously been excluded from. Human traders were finding new opportunities in Velthari space. Human voices were being heard for the first time in decades. All because an empress had remembered a kindness shown to her in childhood. Kane smiled to himself and took a sip of his coffee. Finally hot again. After so many years of settling for cold, he was still just a cargo hauler. That would never change. But somewhere out there, among the countless stars and worlds and peoples of the galaxy, he had made a difference that would echo for generations. And for an ordinary man who had never asked for anything except a quiet life, that was more than enough.